Welcome to Tap In with us today. So happy that you're with us for our third meeting with Dr. Claus Springborg. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We are going to look at the next knot. So, of course, I recommend people to go back and listen to the ones before, and otherwise you're just going to have a fun experience here. Probably getting some of it, probably not getting other bits of it, but you're always inspiring to listen to no matter what. That's what I think.
Thanks.
So negative reification
Yes.
is the third knot.
Yes.
Say more about that. What is
Good.
that word?
So maybe just to frame it a little bit, it's like the five knots are patterns that people have which distract their attention from being in the present moment. And so far we looked at positive reification and we looked at the knot of conditionality. So positive reification is that when you are in the present moment, it feels amazing, and then you turn that amazing feeling into a thing. So that's the reification part, but a positive thing. And then you start philosophizing about it. And that philosophizing takes your attention away from being. The knot of conditionality, now that you made it into a positive thing, you start thinking about how do I get more of it and how do I hold on to it. And so you start looking for it and planning for how to retain it. And all that looking for it and planning takes your attention away from the present moment and actually makes you lose awareness of it. And you will interpret that as that you've lost it, and then you get even more frantic. The knot of negative reification is when you turn the experience of becoming aware of being in the present moment, when you turn that into a negative thing. And it might sound weird, why would you turn it into a negative thing? But there's a couple of reasons for it. One, the experience of being can come across in many different ways. And I often talk about this when you meditate and then you describe what it feels like, the meditation feels like. I mean, sometimes it just feels like you're sitting there and looking at the mess in your head. But sometimes you can have profoundly positive experiences. Sometimes it feels very peaceful. Sometimes it feels very joyful. Sometimes it feels very tender, feels very alive, and so on. You can then get attached to one particular way of experiencing being. Let's say you really like the peace. You love the peace. When you sit down to meditate, that's what you're going for. And then you sit down to meditate, and in that day, you don't experience being in the present moment as peace. You experience it as full-on aliveness. But if in your mind you say, no, this is wrong, I was going for the peace, you might look at the aliveness and not enjoy it, but say, this is a disturbance. This is something that gets in the way of peace. And so the moment you get attached to one specific way of experiencing being, other ways of experiencing being can look like something that is a disturbance or a blockage, and then you turn it into a negative thing and you start avoiding it. You could flip it. Maybe you just love the aliveness, right? You love to sit down and meditate, and your whole body feels like vibrantly alive. All the tensions dissolve. You feel this beautiful expansion, this vitality. One day, that's not what you feel. You feel the peaceful aspect. And then you go like, where's my aliveness? This feels dead. This feels boring, right?
Yeah.
And now you call it deadness. You call it boredom. You call it loss of vitality. It's still just the peace. The sensory experience is the same. But you conceptualize it as a negative thing. So that's one way that you can get to a place where an aspect of being feels like a negative thing.
So the meditation is just an example.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So because you have a question in that chapter about what are the contexts that the client what context is the client in to make that state negative?
Yes, exactly. So, for example, you can say, how do you make peace, the sense of peace, the felt sense of peace, which is just like an inner sense of stillness, right? How do you turn that into, what context can you use to turn that into a negative state?
Yeah.
And if you say the context is a search for vitality, right? If you frame your meditation as a hunt for vitality, which, by the way, don't do that, but you might, right? Sometimes you do that. And in that context, the sense of inner stillness just looks like deadness.
Okay, so the context would be what is that you're aiming for? What is your expectations?
What kind of situation do you think you are in? Like, this is so interesting. If you sit down to meditate, what kind of action do you think that is? You might think it's a hunt for vitality. You might think it's a hunt for peace. You might think it's a break. You might think it's sort of like a mental fitness situation. You might that you can have a million different contexts, and depending on what your context is, the elements of the situation are going to look very different. And this is how experiences of being in the present moment can all of a sudden appear as a negative thing.
Yeah.
There's another. I think the second way in which that I see is very common way of turning an aspect of being or an experience of being into a negative thing is actually if you really like it, and then you develop a lot of ideas about how to get it, and those ideas have negative consequences, and at some point you start blaming the state for the negative consequences of that are actually consequences of how you are trying to search for the state, right? Misconceived ideas of how to search for state. For example, you can say, let's say you really like peace. And then you say, how do I get more peace? And then you think, well, I think the way to get peace is, peace is just an aspect of being. It's there when you tune into it. But you might develop the idea that to feel peace, you have to get rid of anything that's disturbing, especially conflicts. And now you start avoiding conflicts.
Right. Okay.
And then the problem with that is you are not very assertive anymore. And then you start lumping you catch onto it and say there's something not very assertive here, right? I everybody else is steamrolling me all the time, and then you say it's this stillness inside, right? That does that. So you lump it all together. The thing you are looking for or hunting for, you lump it together with the negative effect of the way you hunt for it, and you start blaming the stillness for that. And then you think, okay, then you don't call it stillness or peace anymore. Then you call it like lack of assertiveness. And so this is another process through which aspects of being can start to appear as something negative.
Wow, okay. Yeah, I'm getting images in my mind when you say that.
Yeah.
So there's something about it being a fixation, a mission-fixed mindset. Is that what you're talking about now? That you have this fixed.
The first way, it's like if you have a fixation on I am on a mission to get to a particular aspect of being, okay, so then you kind of have tunnel vision and you don't recognize other ways in which being can appear as, oh, that's what it is.
Okay, so is it part of the misconceptions?
That is definitely a misconception. Yeah.
So this is sort of your logic as we're coming to learn through these conversations, that you have different, this is the misconception and this is why we don't see.
Yeah, so I'll say the knot of negative reification is informed by a couple of misconceptions.
Yeah.
Like, for example, first of all, that you think you're separate from the thing that you're looking for. If you didn't think that, you wouldn't be on a hunt for it, and then other things wouldn't look as obstacles. Another misconception that is very key to, especially the knot of negative reification, is the idea, and it's so common, that we contain inner enemies, inner obstacles. that we
Right.
contain states that are
That should be avoided.
that should be
right?
avoided.
So inner states should be avoided.
Yeah, like certain inner states should be avoided, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. What about the state where you want to transform?
That is so interesting
Yeah.
because many times, like, how do you can say, if I step up back one step, you can say, how do you recognize the knot of negative reification? Basically, it's if clients tell you that there's a certain inner state that they want to avoid, we're in the domain of negative reification, right? They're seeing something, they think it's negative, they want to avoid it.
So it's pretty common.
That's pretty common.
Yeah.
But that desire to avoid something can be expressed in many different ways. Sometimes it's just expressed directly, right? I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to feel insecure. I don't want to feel whatever. Sometimes it's a little more tricky, because sometimes clients have been listening enough to read enough books about therapy to know that going and saying I don't want to feel sad, that's almost like therapeutic illiteracy, right? Because it's like, no, sadness is a good thing, vulnerability is a good thing, but actually I don't want to feel it, right? So how do I express that I don't want to feel it if I can't express it directly because you don't say that? And then often what people do instead is, I would like to embrace my vulnerability so that it will go away, or I'd like to transform my vulnerability, or I'd like to. So when I hear these, like, I like to transform, I like to. Many times I'll look at clients and go like, so does that mean you just, if you had a choice, you would just like not to feel it? And many times clients go like, yes.
Okay, I see. Because on another chapter, you have a thing called transformational therapy, right? Or you call this transformational therapy.
Yes.
So it's not that you're against transforming, because when I read it, I have that recognition of my own desire to transform, and it's been even greater than it is now, but it's still there. And I'm sure that it's a complex phenomenon inside of me, that it's not only one thing. It's probably some critique in there as well. But the positive, that's a judgment, of course, but like the one thing that I feel is authentic is I really want to fulfill my potential, if you can put it like that. Like I want to transform what's negative.
Yeah. And this is exactly how it's expressed. Like,
Okay.
what is negative?
Yeah.
So you believe that there is something that's negative.
Yes.
Exactly. And I mean, you'd not be alone, right? Everybody does that. So, I think in therapy, there is something that transforms, but it's often not the thing that we think. Many times we think, like, what transforms? I transform, right? My emotions, my beliefs, all of these things transform, but my inner states transform. I say, actually, often that's not the case. It's not the thing that transforms, it's your perspective on it. So I play a very interesting game with my students, and I love this game.
Okay.
So I will describe a felt sense state. Maybe you'll describe a felt sense state like, we can go like inner warmth and vibration and expansion and energy, right? You can feel that, like warmth, energy, expansion, right? Okay, so that's the state. And then I give two very simple contexts. First, I say, if this is a good thing, so that's the context, right? What kind of thing is it? It's a good thing. That's the kind of thing it is. What is it then? And then there's but this is aliveness, this is passion, this is being turned on, this is like assertiveness. Great. Okay. Then I say, well, actually, we made a mistake. Let's put it in the exact same feelings, the exact same felt sense. Let's change the context. It's not a good kind of a thing. It's a bad kind of a thing. What is it? Oh, this vibration and heat and energy. It is aggression. It is frustration. It is anxiety. It is like, and then you have all these other names. And I think what is really interesting here is the names for the inner states are not describing what you feel, they're describing the context, right? It's that felt sense in context. So what transforms is what context you see things in. But many times clients will feel it as if the thing transformed. Many times, and this is another negative reification, people will say something like, once I was working with a manager, it was great. She was feeling a lot of frustration with her employees, but she didn't want to say that because she thought like, if you are angry at your employees as a leader, as a manager, you're a bit of a loser. If she saw her colleagues being angry at her employees, she would say, they're not very. So she said she jumped through hoops to not say she was angry, right? It's like, I would like them to take more responsibility and
this
stuff
is the
like
context, right? This is what you call the context.
So she saw anger as a bad thing.
That's
right?
the context.
She said, what kind of a thing is it? It's a bad thing, so I should avoid it.
Yeah.
Then through different ways, I normalized it and say, well, if you've been a manager for more than a month, you've been angry with your employees, right? And that's the same with parents. Sometimes parents think you shouldn't get angry with your kids. Give me a break. Like, if you've been a parent for more than a day, you're going to be angry with your kid, right? Maybe 2 days. But because they are annoying sometimes, right? I mean, they just are. But then I invited her to say, okay, let's look at this state. So she felt something, right? Let's look at this thing that you call anger. And just rather, set aside all your judgments. Let's postpone judgment of this thing and also suspend judgment of this thing and just describe what does it feel like. And she's like, okay, so it feels like there's definitely a lot of energy, right? And she started this experience of describing this energy and heat and vibration and all of these things. And one of my tricks is I ask her to describe it through neutral sensory words, because neutral sensory words, you can't express negative judgments using neutral sensory words. So she says, all these kind of things. And then at some point, you just saw the light goes on in her head and she's like, hang on a sec. This feels like taking leadership. This is what I'm paid to do.
Okay.
Now, did the state transform? No. But her perspective on the state transformed.
That sounds very powerful. Wow, okay.
And many times I will take people and explore states of meaninglessness and they find peace. I will explore states of superficiality and they find joy. I will explore heartbrokenness and they find tenderness and humanness.
It sounds too good to be true, Claus.
I've done this for decades.
Whoa. Okay, but let's return to, because my mind is a little bit stuck in when you talked about being angry with your children. I think there was something
you can relate to.
There was something I can relate to, but also I can relate to, I'm not supposed to be that.
Yes, I think every parent can do that.
Because we don't want that to happen. But then as I'm learning about anger, yes, we can have the feeling. We should have the feeling. The feeling is there. It's just the way that whether you express it or not. So how do you look at that? I mean, there's some decisions to make for a leader, for a parent.
Yes.
How are you going to express what you feel?
I will say, and I think that's a really good question, because I would say feeling the state is never the issue. Never the issue. It's what you do with it. Mm-hmm. Because of course, I'm not advocating yelling at your children. I'm not advocating yelling at your employees, right? I mean, very rare occasions, maybe that will be the right thing to do, right? If a kid is running onto a freeway, maybe if the only way you can stop them from doing that is yelling, fine. So, but generally, right? So you separate what you do from the state. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're in a state where you get angry, chances are you're in a situation where you need a certain amount of energy to deal with the situation. Now, if you say, oh, all this vibration and heat and energy I feel inside, that's anger, so you disconnect from it, you disconnect yourself from the resource that you need to deal with the situation. It can come out in many different ways. Like if you feel a lot of energy, for example, in many times in relationships, if something is a little bit off in the relationship, you might want to be very clear. And energy is a wonderful way of being clear. And it doesn't have to be with yelling or whatever.
It's just that you're direct and
Yeah, you're very direct.
you're talking about it.
Exactly. So, like for example, I worked with another manager. It was fantastic. He was working in a company where the culture was a little bit like the people who survives, right? And the rest will go and work in another company.
Okay.
and they feel... So there was a lot of internal competition and conflict. And most of the people there were just fine. They were like, yeah, we battle it out. And then, that's just the way we work. And then there was this guy who was very sweet, and he was like, look, sometimes I'm okay with backing down if it's for the good of the company, but I feel that sometimes people take a bit advantage of me, and I'm not quite okay with that, right? If it's just because it's not good for the company, but good for somebody else's career, yeah, I'd prefer not to back down. And we were working with these kind of things. And at one point he came back, and it was so awesome because he said, since the last session, there was a colleague that had done one of these things, right? And then he had, with no aggression or anything, like no yelling, no nothing, he's just gone down to his office and he said, you did this, it has this consequence for my department. I don't think it's fair, but I'm curious to hear your take on it. And then he said, and then the other one had said, you're right. And then he had changed. And he was like, wow, that was simple.
How did that transformation happen?
Well, he didn't mince his words, right? He was very clear and direct. It wasn't any sort of like, maybe is this fair or not fair or something like that. He was very clear. I don't think it's fair. Okay. And because of this and this and this.
So that's the way of containing the anger and then being able to express it in an appropriate way like that.
Yeah, so but I think even the word containing can have a little bit of an issue.
Okay.
Because I think you don't contain anything. I think you just give it full flow it's almost like, with anger, what I usually say is, how do you make a bomb, right? The way you make a bomb is that you have a lot of energy and then you put a shell around it. And then when the energy is bigger than the shell, you have the explosion, right? That's how you build a bomb. So if you think in terms of containment, I don't say that containment can mean a lot of different things. But I often see that people, and I don't know if that's what you meant when you say containment. There's perfectly good ways of talking about container.
Okay.
But if it's like, I hold it back a bit, that's risky business. Yeah. Because now you're setting yourself up for an explosion. So it's more, I think, another way of thinking about containment is almost like widening the room. Yeah. So it's big enough for the energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is you can call that containment again, but it's a containment that doesn't go against the energy.
Yeah. Right.
So and I think
that's a good clarification. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're widening the room that you're in.
Yes.
So you have that capacity to hold the anger.
Yeah. So there's a fearlessness of giving words to your thoughts and your feelings. I think another example that many people can relate to is relationships.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get angry with our partners.
Yeah.
I believe that's fairly common. And then you can say, okay, what do you do with that? Many times we put a little bit of a boundary on it because we think if we say what we think and feel, we can cause ruptures in the relationship, and we're scared of that, so we should contain that. But when we do that, frustration builds, and we end up yelling at our partner, and then there's a rupture, right? But yeah. But you can also say, like, if you get angry at your partner and you want to engage in a conversation with your partner about what you got angry about, why do you want to do that? Right? You want to do that because you love your partner. You want to do that because you want to clear anything that it's like sand in the machinery, right? There's something uncomfortable in the relationship, and you don't want to tolerate that separation or that trust. So therefore you go like, I want this thing sorted out. That's a declaration of love.
Yeah.
And many times you can say anger in that sense it's passion.
Yeah. Absolutely. I see. Yeah.
And when that's your own perspective on your state, it opens up other possibilities for acting than if your perspective is, oh, this is anger and this is a problematic emotion that should be kept in check in order not to destroy the relationship. No, the state that you're feeling is the very resource in you that is interested in taking care of the relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's passion.
I feel what you're talking about now is when you say that this knot we're talking about today, negative reification, is antithetical to love. But then you say it's also a frog that turns into a prince when kissed.
Yes. I think a lot. Okay, so this is because I have these references to fairy tales in the end of one of the chapters, right? I talk about the Beauty and the Beast and the Frog Prince and these kind of and Aladdin's lamp. I think is the third one, right? Now maybe Aladdin's lamp is the best one because the lamp doesn't change. It's just your perspective on it that changes, right? First, it's placed in a context of a lot of riches, and then the lamp looks pretty plain, right? There's jewels and gold and whatnot, and then the lamp looks pretty plain. But when you know what it is, that's the most precious thing in the room, and so you will see it differently. But it didn't change, and I think in the other fairy tales, it looks as if the thing changes. But I would say it doesn't. It's just your perspective, right? Why does in the Beauty and the Beast why does the beast suddenly look like a prince?
Yeah, she falls in love.
Yeah, because she falls in love and she sees the goodness in the personality structure, right? And therefore it shifts what is important.
Yeah.
And so to illustrate it dramatically, right? They have a physical change. But is it just her perspective that changes?
That's a good point, because that's what happens when you fall in love, right? You can't see the faults anymore. Right?
Well,
when you fall in love,
I think
not
when
like the next phase, but like when you totally fall in love.
Yes, there's something about but actually I think it's interesting with when you fall in love, because if you notice when you fall in love with somebody, they become physically more attractive. Right? Physically, they look different to you.
Yeah.
Chances are they don't look different. Right? Nothing changed actually.
Yeah.
Only your perspective.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And it's the same. I mean, when people first experience untying the knot of negative reification, and they sometimes they say they feel meaninglessness in life, right, or in a certain situation. And I say, do you want to play with that? And they say, well, since you ask me, okay. Otherwise, probably not. But yes. And we go in and I ask them, so what does the meaningless feel like? And if you should describe it with neutral sensory words. And they would say, well, okay, it feels empty. Good. It feels very still, right? There's not much going on. It's basically just this vast open space, right?
Oh, it's really difficult to describe without any...
It is a challenge to describe
Subjective
it
words.
because we are so used to describing it with the subjective words. But if you really describe the feeling, it's just a big open silent space. And then I will often be cheeky and say that's exactly the thing that people meditate for years to get to, and you have it right here, right? And when people really get it, they really say, wow, this is a huge relief. So meaninglessness is just a word that we place on the vast open silence.
That sounds transformational for sure. When you
Yes.
put it like that.
But the important is what transformed.
The context.
Yeah. The state remained the exact same,
Yeah.
but how you looked at it, the context you put it in, your perspective on it
Interesting.
changed. But often people will think that it was the thing that changed.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I went to the session and I was feeling meaningless, and I left the session feeling this openness and freedom.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how it happened.
Yeah.
And it takes a little while before clients catch on and really get this, that what transforms is not them or their states. What transforms is the perspective.
This is good stuff.
Yeah.
We need to practice.
Yes.
I feel. Claus, I would love to use the last of our time together on Reich, just because I'm pretty much into everything that he's written, and you talk about Reich in terms of body armoring.
Yeah.
Tension is not being.
Yeah.
Let me know what's your interest in Reich and how to use him in this knot.
Okay, so the first disclaimer here is I'm not an expert in Reich or these kind of things, but I find this part of his work very interesting because it reflects something that I see when I work with the knot of negative reification.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, so the first step is, of course, identifying what are people avoiding. Okay, good. And there are different ways of doing that, right? It's like sometimes they just tell you, sometimes they're sneaky, they say they want to transform it. Sometimes they just avoid situations. I don't want to get in this kind of situation. But then you say, okay, why don't you want to get in this situation? It's kind of like you avoid the situation because because you think if you get into that situation, you will connect with an inner state. Why do you avoid speaking in public? Because you want to avoid the state of anxiety, right? Yeah. Why do you avoid talking to your ex or something like that? Because you want to avoid the state that you think will emerge in you. So you avoid the situation to avoid the state. And there are other ways of detecting. But you detect what is it they're avoiding. The next thing is to ask people to describe the felt sense of it. And as you said before, that's a little bit difficult. And one of the reasons it's difficult is like, imagine there's a state you really don't like. So maybe you don't like the state of, I don't know, what would be a state that people would
I think the anxiety one, I can relate to that.
Okay, the
Speaking
anxiety,
in front
for
of
example.
people.
Yeah. So you avoid the anxiety, right? And then I say, what does the feeling of anxiety actually feel like? Yes.
Something's shaky and...
Yeah, sometimes people will say it feels very tense.
It is absolutely tense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is an interesting answer because that's across the board. What does meaningless feel like? Tense. What does anger feel like? Tense. What does anxiety feel like? Tense. What does, and you go, that's not actually the feeling of the state you're avoiding. Many times when you feel tense,
is to not feel it.
Yes, exactly. It's the feeling of your avoidance, not your feeling of the thing you avoid.
Got it.
And therefore, it's very interesting to work with tension. And this is also this is the connection to Aikian, right? Because it's like they work a lot with breathing. One of the ways you avoid feeling things is just holding your breath. Right? You desensitize yourself by holding your breath. Another way is physical tension, body armor. That's a very smart way of avoiding something. And then I think it's interesting because depending on where people think the thing they avoid is located, they will have different tension patterns. Now, this is not something that I don't work physically with people's bodies, so this is just what I've gathered from language. And this is why I would love to talk to somebody who's more into the body side of things, which I will have an opportunity to do soon.
Yeah.
So, going on the conference.
You're going into the world and speaking to a lot of different people. So.
Yes, exactly. So that's something that I'm looking forward there. But when I speak to people, I find that there are 4, 5, maybe 6 tension patterns. So I'm just going to mention a few of them. Sometimes they will say, I don't like this feeling of anger, right? Where's the anger? It's at the end of my palm. I'm pushing it away. If I'm pushing it away, then you can ask specific questions. What does the thing, instead of asking the tension, because they say it feels tense. Yeah, pushing something away there's a tension involved. But what the thing you're pushing away, what does that feel like? What's the substance you're pushing away? That's what I'm interested in knowing. And another way that they can do it is they can say, I don't like this, right? Now I'm not pushing it away, I'm moving away. That's different.
Okay.
Also tension involved in moving away from something, but then you can ask different questions. You can say like, what is the thing you're moving away like? What does that feel like? Sometimes you think it's located inside of you and you try to keep it in. You have a small box and you try to keep it in.
So all of that creates different patterns of tension.
Different patterns of tension, yes.
Is there a specific one when it's anxiety, usually?
No, I don't think so. I think with all of these tension, I don't know. I haven't seen any. It's a good question. Maybe there would be specific tension patterns that people usually use with specific states. I don't know. I haven't noticed any patterns.
But so your point here is that you take this contrary to being, which is this is the center.
So in the non-negative reification, it's like there's a state of being. It's been conceptualized as a negative thing, and then we're avoiding it. In order to sort out this mess, to untie this knot, first you have to distinguish between the felt sense of your avoidance and the thing you avoid. So you say, let's set aside all the tensions and focus on the feeling of the thing you're avoiding. And then they say it feels terrible, right? It feels like, and people will often describe it with abstract concepts. It feels the anxiety, it feels dangerous, or it feels whatever. And you say, well, these are all ideas about it. What is it actually, the physical felt sense, if you can describe it with neutral sensory words? And in the case of anxiety, for example, maybe it feels like a classical one would be the butterflies in the stomach, right? So there's a fluttering feeling in your stomach.
Yeah.
Then you say, okay, if you explore this feeling, setting aside your judgments of it, you think it's a bad thing. What if it was a good thing, right? If the fluttering in the stomach is a good thing, what is it? And it transforms from anxiety into something like excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is what is so difficult with these emotions. Is it anger? Is it excitement? Is it just me being anxious?
The reason is, and there's actually research on this. I came across a very interesting researcher. I forgot her name now. I can send it to you. You can include it in the description.
Yeah.
What she said is there's a nice TED talk where she talks about how research on emotions has been looking for the physical correlations between emotions and so facial expressions, different activations in the brain, different hormones or something like that. Can we find the physical component that correspond to a specific emotion? And she says when you look at individual studies, you find correlations, but when you look at the whole thing as a field, one says, anxiety or like whatever correspond to these hormones or brain states or physical postures or whatever. Another study says, no, it corresponds to these over here. And she says there's just not a consensus. And the conclusion she draws is emotions they do have a physical component, but it's a physical component plus a context. And she uses the thing about the fluttering in the stomach. If you feel a fluttering in the stomach before going and giving a talk to a lot of people, you're going to think what you're feeling now is anxiety.
Yeah.
If you feel the exact same feeling, in the airport, and you're about to go to a place that you're really looking forward to going to, you will call the exact same physical sensation excitement. And this is why emotions are sometimes tricky.
Yeah.
With the knot of negative reification, I think for this very reason is one that's really near and dear to my heart. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Because it helps us break a lot of taboos, and a lot of the taboos are around emotions. So we talked about anger a lot of times, and how when you examine the physical felt sense of anger, setting aside all your judgments, pure vitality, right? It's like pure energy. Wonderful. Okay, let's keep going. Sadness and vulnerability, right? When you explore the physical felt sense of sadness and vulnerability, there's a lot of tension because you don't like it and you want to avoid it and these kind of things. But when you really explore it, you just feel this exquisite tenderness, this humanness, this, and so many times you feel connectedness there as well, right? It's like this is where all your pretense falls away and you become soft and tender and able to connect with other people. There's this really nice movie, Inside Out, where sadness is sort of like the taboo, and then when they finally understand it, they see the positive, that it's actually a positive emotion. Then there is, I think, especially in some spiritual circles, desire is seen as something bad, right? It's like anger is if you have the three kleshas in Buddhism, you've got ignorance and hatred, and which is more on the anger side, and then desire, right? The grasping side. So that's something that we shouldn't feel, right? But if you go into the felt sense of it and just feel it, there is also an aliveness in it, but there's also a kind of like when you really allow yourself to say, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that, right? There's a sense of like, it's almost like a fountain. It's like this bubbly fountain. And when you think maybe this sense of a bubbly fountain, what is this feeling, right? It's pure joy. Pure joy. Boredom is another one, right?
That we want to avoid, you mean?
Many people want to avoid boredom, right? We want excitement. We scroll on our phone. Has somebody, made a short that can chase away our boredom for 5 seconds, right? But if you embrace boredom and just say, what does boredom mean? When you're really bored and you want to be bored, right? You try to be bored. I have a friend of mine who said that sometimes he told his clients an exercise. Make sure you're bored every day, right? It's like important. His explanation was, if you're never bored, you never relax. I think there's something to it. But when you're bored and you don't worry about it, there's this beautiful sense of landing, right? Grounding. Nothing's going on. It's great. I think many people have a difficult time meditating because when you meditate, you often feel that beautiful state of grounding, and people see it as boredom. So when you feel bored when meditating, wonderful, keep at it, you're right on track, right? This is where you want to go. What else is there?
Interesting. I feel like when I'm bored, I need to eat. Like I really need to eat. And when I've eaten and I'm still bored, I need to eat again. Like it's not hunger.
But that's interesting, right? It's like, I mean, there can be multiple experiences, but or reasons for that. But I think next time you want to eat, it's exciting eating. I like eating too, right? It gives you like sensory pleasure, and you don't want to eat just anything, right? You want to eat something that's exciting. So, yeah, I get that. But then it can be very interesting to say, okay, let me sit down And maybe I got it wrong. I think boredom is a boring thing, but what happens if I think boredom is a great thing? Maybe you got like, you think have to sit and meditate, right? In order to get to that beautiful state. Here you got it for free. It just popped up spontaneously. Don't chase it away with food.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but I've definitely been seeing through that pattern, like, okay, when I need to eat this much, there's something going on. I'm
Yeah.
avoiding something, probably boredom. Yeah.
Yes, and I think one of the things that reasons I really love working with the knot of negative reification is, as long as you see it as boredom, it's going to be hard for you not to avoid it. If going through the process of sensing taboos, which is the process of untying the knot of negative reification, and you recognize, oh my God, I thought this was a negative thing, but when this is beautiful, it's just I'm landing, I'm relaxed, I'm feeling grounded. This is amazing. When your perspective on it changes, it's not hard to not
there.
avoid it.
Yeah,
You don't want to avoid it. Imagine you had the same kind of attitude towards meaninglessness and pointlessness and shame and anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Your life would be radically altered, even just changing your perspective on one of these things.
Yeah, I'm gonna play around with that. Hopefully we all are gonna try and do that for ourselves. Just be curious and investigating a little bit.
Yeah.
Could this be seen from another point of view, from a neutral point of view?
Yes.
Whatever the experience or the status. See, you call this insulation, correct?
Insulation is one of the tension patterns.
Okay. So it's a tension that occurs when clients are trying to feel the state they avoid.
Yes. So this is something I see many times. If you have tried to go through, if you tried to embrace or connect with the state that you avoid, and then you end up feeling amazing, then you get the idea, I can avoid the states by transforming them, by staying with them, right? That's you hear this many times, right? Embrace the states and they will transform.
The way through is the way in.
Yes, those are the kind of slogans you hear in therapy.
What's wrong with that?
What is wrong with that is what we talked about in the start, which is you have to understand really clearly what transforms. Because if you think it's the thing that transforms rather than your perspective on the thing that transforms, then the risk is that you embrace it as a way of avoiding it. And if you do that, and I've seen this many times, it's like, so I will. People say, okay, they come and they feel meaninglessness. Let's take that example, and I'd say, just what would happen if you like touch into the meaninglessness and hang out with the meaninglessness for a while, and and just describe it in a physical felt sense. And so the client does that, and after a while, the client looks at me and says, "It's not working." And then I say, what?
What?
That makes me curious, right? Because if they say it's not working, they have an idea in their mind of what should be happening. Often the idea is this feeling that I'm feeling should go away and I should feel something better instead. The tension pattern there, or the way that I look at it is I compare it with saying, let's explore water. And they say, yep, I'm willing to dive into the water. And then they put on a wetsuit, right? And they jump in the ocean. So technically, they're in the ocean. They're surrounded by the feeling that they're avoiding, which is not necessary. You could just have touched it with a finger. That's enough. But they're in the middle of it, and you say, wow, they're really going for it. But actually, there's this slim tension around them, so they are not actually touching it. They're just plunging into it, and going like, how long am I gonna sit here before this thing goes away? And if you do that, it's never gonna change because your perspective on it isn't changing. And therefore you're gonna be just re-traumatizing yourself by sitting in something you find extremely uncomfortable for a long time.
Yeah, it does sound potentially re-traumatizing, but you said it's enough to just dip your feet in it.
Yes, if you want to know something about the feeling that you avoid, many times, especially if I'm working with something that people are very scared of, I won't say just plunge in and fill yourself up with it because it's gonna be way too much. Many times I will work with saying limiting the physical amount of exposure or the time amount of exposure. So I can say something like, just touch it with the tip of your finger. That's much more manageable. Don't feel hopelessness invading you or something like that. Just put your finger on it and tell me, what does it feel like? You can get so much information through the tip of your finger. You can feel that it's like silent or spacious or something like that. And you feel you're still in control.
Yeah.
Which is good.
That's what I think is really healthy, that you're not completely invaded, like you said, by the emotion. It's not you.
No, exactly. And sometimes I say, put your finger on it for a second. A second is, so this is a nice chair, right? It's very soft. I can go like this for 1 second and I will know that it's soft and velvety. I don't have to feel it longer than that to get that experience. And that's enough to start changing. If you get 1 second of clear felt sense experience, and while you're setting aside your judgments, that's enough to start transforming your perspective on the thing. And that's all that's needed.
Okay, so returning to the image, the client is saying it's not working, then you say, stay with it, or what do you say then?
Often when they say it's not working, I want to clarify their agenda.
Yeah.
And so I will ask them, what is it you imagine will happen? What are you expecting to happen? Because if you say it isn't working, you have an idea about what should be happening, and it's good to put words to that idea. And then sometimes they will say, well, it still feels the same. Like, yeah, it's going to feel the same forever. The feeling is never going to change. Right? I touch this chair, and then I touch it again, and I go like, it's not working. Like, what's not working, Claus? It still feels velvety. Right? It's not going to change. But by gathering information and setting aside your judgment, I might start liking the velvety thing and go like, oh, this is really soft, this is really nice, rather than saying, oh, this is really soft, this is a weak thing, I don't like it. Right?
Yeah, okay. I think I get it. I think I'm about to get it. Oh, it's a different way of understanding, and yet it connects very well to other therapies that I know. So
yeah.
So I feel safe, yet there is something really different here.
Yes, I think so too. I think one of the authors that have inspired me tremendously over the years is Gregory Bateson. I have so much respect for that guy. And there is one paper in particular that I think is absolutely amazing.
He's the anthropologist, right? Is he?
He's everything.
He's everything.
I think his education is in biology, but he's made contributions to anthropology. He's one of the ones that developed the concept of the double bind to explain schizophrenia. He's worked with alcoholics and addictions. He's worked with. He was one of the pioneers in the whole cybernetics and systems thinkings movement.
Yeah.
I think Richard Bandler and John Grinder spoke with him when they developed NLP. It's like he's everywhere.
He just touched it all.
And in organizational theory, you have Argyris and Schoen and double loop learning. Double loop learning is basically just an adaptation of Gregory Bateson's deutery learning or learning 2.
Okay.
And he's written a paper called the logical levels of communication and learning. You can find it in the book Steps to an Ecology of Mind on page 282, I think.
Wow.
I read it recently. And I'm not sure about the page number. But what he does is he takes Whitehead and Russell's, they worked with logic, and they worked with different logical levels, and he applies that to the concept of learning. And so he says you can learn at different levels, and learning on one level cannot affect learning on another level. And if you conflate learning on one level with learning on another level, you get in a muddle. You create paradox, and you get in a muddle. So you have to distinguish between them. The thing he called learning one is learning trial and error. What works, right? You're in a context, you do something, it's working, it's not working. You get the thing the result you expect or not. Okay, fine, that's one level of learning. Then there's another level of learning, which is understanding what are the impact on your experience of organizing your experience in different ways. He calls it punctuating your experience. This is what we're talking about here. When you change how you categorize things, when you change what context you put them in, when you change how you categorize a situation or categorize a felt sense, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? When you do that, that's learning at level 2. That's not the same as learning at level 1, and this is why you have to keep these two very separate. So, and this is, you can say, transformation. You can apply the same idea of logical levels to transformation.
How so?
There's transformation of the substance, you change.
Yeah.
And then there's transformation of how you categorize the substance.
Okay.
They are different things.
Yeah.
So if you experience a change in perspective, a transformation of your perspective, and then you think it was a transformation of your the felt sense of your emotion, you get in a muddle. You confuse transformation at level 2 with transformation at level 1.
Okay, so it's basically just what you have already said, but now Bateson is...
It's just I like to sort of disclose some of my sources because give credit where credit is due.
Okay, so
I
it's
would not
actually
have come
inspired.
up with this stuff if I had not read Bateson like 20 years ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. I didn't
It's
get
been
that.
hugely inspiring for me.
Okay, for this whole system.
Yeah.
Okay. So the way that he talks about levels is something we see throughout.
Yes, that
your work as well.
clarity of thinking about logical levels and not confusing categories with the things in the category.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Klaus.
Yes.
We have to wrap up.
Oh, yes, but we have more. We meet again.
We'll meet again. We have to.
Yes.
Thank you for this rich episode. There's a lot here.
Yes.
And a lot to look into.
Yeah.
For the curious listener.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for that. I love that. I love all the references and how it's always a little bigger than I think it is. When we start out, it's like, oh, okay, you're taking me there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.